So it's been in the zeitgeist recently, it's in the news and things that billionaires are trying to engineer a recession for the US and, let's be honest, probably globally, because they will benefit massively from it. And it got me thinking, well, hang on, how does anyone benefit from a recession? So I did a bit of digging around and I've come up with 10 reasons why billionaires do brilliantly in recessions. And I even have examples. So without any further ado, let's get into what those 10 reasons are and see what we can do about either getting angry about it or maybe fighting back against it. All right, so number one, buying assets at fire sale prices. So one of the things that, of course, billionaires have, and that class of people have, is lots and lots of disposable money. So when other organizations and individuals start running out of money, then they can swoop in and buy things at very low prices. You see, normal people, which is really kind of anyone worth less than maybe $100 million, so there's some pretty rich but not absurdly rich people in there, they're in a position where you can have lots of assets. But if the entire economy starts going down, then the only way you're going to be able to do anything is sell some of your existing assets at a rock bottom price. And that's where the billionaires just swoop in with their capital and simply buy it all up. A great example, actually, of this was Warren Buffett. He invested billions in Goldman Sachs and Bank of America in 2008. He worked on the principle that the government would never let them actually go bust, and therefore he bought them at rock bottom prices and has done incredibly well with those stocks since. I will say, in Warren Buffett's defense, at least you as an individual are able to invest in his organization. After all, you can buy shares in Berkshire Hathaway if you choose. But most people are not in that position. They don't have the capital, they don't have the inside line, they don't have the resources available to them. So what billionaires are effectively doing is taking advantage of normal people and picking their pocket by going, let's have a recession, let's make everything go down in the short term. A load of people can't cope with that and therefore have to sell assets at stupid prices. Number two, short selling. So the idea of short selling is that you know or believe that a stock price will drop in the future. So you place a bet saying, I think the price will be lower in the future. You can place a bet with your broker on that, and if it comes true, you're great. If it doesn't come true, you can get yourself in all sorts of trouble and end up owing people a huge amounts of money. So typical normal people can't really do anything useful with short selling. Now, dare I also say that the billionaire class is very much more likely to have some sort of inside line on short selling, because they probably know all the other people who are in that environment, or many of them, and they can start doing, dare I say this, insider trading. Is it insider trading if they're just chatting with their mate at the tennis club? Well, actually, yes, technically it is, and they should go to prison for it, but no one ever does. So short selling is a great way for billionaires to make loads of money. This is effectively closed to average people. They don't have the leverage. Even if you knew a stock was going to drop precipitously and bet on it, you don't have enough money to actually make any significant difference. But of course the billionaires do. Third, leveraging government buyouts. So corporations and institutions often receive government assistance during downturns. This is ultimately the concept of corporate welfare. So it's the capitalism for ye and the socialism or corporate welfare for thee, which means that they know that governments aren't going to allow the too big to fail organizations fail. And as a result, they can benefit greatly from it. It's a great wheeze if you can do it, but it isn't for normal people. And when normal people say this isn't fair and doesn't seem reasonable, suddenly you get accused of being a Marxist or something for suggesting it, even though actually it's the billionaire class who are taking advantage of corporate welfare. So, there's that. 4, buying distressed companies. Now, plenty of companies do this, right? You're a big player in a market and there's a whole bunch of smaller, quite probably more innovative companies in your space, but they simply don't have the cash to ride out the storm, and therefore they are often forced, often by their VCs, to sell out to larger organizations who benefit from buying the innovation from companies who simply don't have the cash flow. Obviously, your average person can't do anything with this. In fact, most of the time, if you are an average person and you work for one of these companies, you're most likely to be the ones who get screwed. But, there you have it. Think about how many tech giants worth now often have put $1 trillion or more on their bottom line or their valuation over the last 5 years, but suddenly are writing off tens of thousands of their workers because those workers got the company to where it is, but they've decided for whatever reason they don't need them now because, well, who knows why. Another wheeze, number 5, investing in essential industries. So, look, all recessions don't necessarily hit everyone at the same rate, right? So billionaires could shift their money into sectors that remain strong. Healthcare is a good example. Not many people will go, well, I'm a bit poorer, so I won't actually go and see the doctor, or I won't have that operation if I need it. I mean, obviously, the very poor are in that position, but the majority of people are somewhere in the middle. And therefore, healthcare is not likely to be affected so much by a recession. There's other things that are often not worried by a recession either. Defense would be another good example of it. They work on a different cycle. Now, if you think about it, here's another one, and this is really a concept around how business changes. So, Amazon, our friends at Amazon, during COVID-19, you can imagine Amazon did brilliantly because no one was allowed to leave the house, or if they did leave the house, they didn't want to go to a shop or a store. And as a result, Amazon did brilliantly well. Now, what did that do? Well, ignoring the fact it put billions of dollars into Jeff Bezos's pocket, what it also did was destroy lots and lots of smaller retailers. Now, a lot of people think of, well, who cares about the retailers? It's the likes of I don't know, Sears or Target or Walmart. They're big enough, they can cope. Well, apparently Sears isn't, as they've gone bust. But it's also attacks, that sort of activity attacks lots and lots of smaller retailers. So what happens is that the local retailers in the non-largest cities get hollowed out and make the billionaires even richer, and then effectively start eroding the fabric of the local society because, everyone might end up buying their stuff from Amazon, but if you're in a mid or a small-sized town, how many people who actually work for Amazon, other than delivery drivers, actually work in that community? And therefore, you're hollowing out an environment which is not just bad for individuals because they can't make money, but it's also just bad for society because there are less jobs. 6, expanding market share while competitors falter. So very big companies on the billionaire class are the ones sitting on all the cash. So if you have lots of cash, you can basically weather the storm. Think of it a bit like oil in an engine, right? The engine's purring away and it's doing all right. But if you start to have to strain the business to try and stay in business, you're gonna need more oil for that. And if you remove the cash, you run out of oil. And you simply end up in an environment where your engine seizes because you don't have any oil in it or not enough. And then the billionaires can come in and basically take over the remnants of your business and right size it, whatever that means, and expand their market share, making the next generation of competitors even harder for them to get going because the people they're competing against are ever bigger and in almost all cases ever pardon me, ever more monopolistic. So these companies become ever more monopolistic, and of course that centralization is a hollowing out of local businesses. Now, before we get to number 7, I want to say, as I'm reading this, I sound like a Marxist or a communist, and believe me, I'm the furthest you can imagine from that. But I am not a fan of the billionaire class, and I'm not a fan of the ever larger centralization and lack of innovation that these enormous organizations bring to a market. It is not healthy. It's bad for individuals. It's bad for the economy. It's bad for democracy. And funnily enough, I actually think it's pretty bad for the billionaires as well. I know everyone goes, oh, wouldn't it be nice to have $1 billion? Well, actually, I don't think so. I think those people have really awful lives. They can't even go to a local restaurant or have a coffee in the street or anything. I mean, they're surrounded by security guards. They must be suspicious of anyone who's their friend because, they all think they're after their money. It must become incredibly isolating. Now, don't get me wrong. I'm not asking you to cry a river for any billionaires here, because I sure as hell am not. But I just think all round, it's a pretty unhealthy system. Number 7, monetizing volatility. So volatility is in the environment where stock prices and valuations are jumping about all over the place. Most normal people who are somewhat risk averse, which is most people because they can't afford to lose tens or hundreds of millions of dollars, aren't in a position to bet in such environments. But if you're a billionaire, you can do that. Because after all, if you lose 10 million or 50 million, 100 million, who cares? You can become unrisk averse, unlike the vast majority of the society. And so what you can do is take real advantages of these things. Now, in another video, I'll demonstrate how the millionaire and billionaire class effectively stop paying tax. Once you get to beyond a certain level, you're just simply beyond the tax system, and you're free to do whatever you like. It's the middle classes, and the middle classes are up to about $600,000 a year. Once you're about maybe $1 million a year, once you're beyond that, then you're an idiot if you pay tax. You're a chump, ignoring the fact that that is the price of civilization. So they can take advantages. They can do fast-moving trading, for example, which you and I, normal people, can't possibly afford to do. And of course, they probably have an inside line as well. So normal people don't have any of the skills or resources or leverage to do any of these things. Now, good examples of monetizing volatility would be Ray Dalio, George Soros. Those guys make tons of money placing large bets. I mean, look at George Soros with the collapse of the ERM and the run on the pound. Oh, wait, what year was that? 86, I seem to remember. Maybe I'm wrong on the year, but it was it made him an absolute fortune of money. Number 8, real estate. So real estate's a really interesting one for most normal, average sorts of people. And I'm not talking about, a car mechanic on $50,000 a year or something. I'm talking about people up to probably earning maybe $500,000, maybe even $1 million a year. So my definition of normal people is pretty high, I suppose, by most standards. But even for folks who are earning those sorts of really high sums compared with the average, the biggest single investment they have is probably their home. So when real estate starts collapsing, lots of people get in trouble because they've borrowed huge amounts of money, often a multiple of their overall income, to borrow the money to buy the house. So if the if the housing market starts disintegrating, they're really in trouble because they can't borrow money against it. They're stuck with a high mortgage. It's destroying value for them. And it's not like you can turn around as an individual and go, crikey, the house is a bit expensive, so let's just sell a bedroom. This is the part of the problem with real estate. It's completely binary. You either own the house or you don't own the house. You can't say, well, I own 3 of the 4 bedrooms in the house and we sold off the downstairs restroom. Right? It doesn't work that way. So what these guys do is they have the money to buy houses and sit on them for months, years, potentially forever if they wanted to. And so what happens is at times of recession in real estate, they come in and start buying houses. Now, not only do individuals do that and family organizations do that, but even people like BlackRock are doing that. So in 2008, the whole investment world started buying residential real estate. And these people have made out like bandits on it. And it's actually worse than it sounds for 2 reasons. Not only did they buy these houses at cut down prices because normal people had lost their job, couldn't afford the mortgage, the house price was dropping anyway, and they effectively lost all their savings. They lost their houses, they lost the roof over their head. But our friends in private equity got to buy their houses at a really cheap rate. So there was a success story there somewhere. Well, of course there was for the billionaire class, but normal people got completely screwed by this. So 10 years later, you think, well, they'll be selling those houses, won't they? And yeah, okay, you'll have to spend significantly more on that house now to buy it, but at least you're in the property market. Except no, that's not how it works at all. Because what actually happens is that they never sell those houses. So what they do is they rent them to you. And because there's less houses on the market, because private equity and the billionaire class is buying all these houses, then there's less houses on the market, which means there's more buyers for less sellers, which drives the prices up, which means ever more people can never get on the property market ladder. And therefore, what's actually happening on both sides of the Atlantic, both certainly in the UK and the US and Australia, but I believe it's happening in other markets that I'm not so familiar with, is that you're ending up with a world in which you have older, wealthier people, or older people who've become wealthy because their houses have shot up in value in the last 30, 40 years, and the young people who it appears will never be able to afford a house. I saw recently in the UK that there are, on average, people are living with their parents until the age of 34 because they can't afford to buy a house, and the house prices are going up faster than their ability ever to buy one. And that will produce an environment in our society where we have effectively two levels within society. We will have homeowners who will be wealthy and can borrow money against that house, and we will have renters who will be permanently in a position where they can never build financial wealth. And one has to ask questions as to whether that's one can almost ignore the moral scenario. I think few of us would say that that's morally acceptable. But from a societal point of view, you got a problem with that, because one of the great pushes of the Western democracies, particularly Australia, the UK, the US, Canada, was people who buy houses and own a part of the society are much less likely to riot. No one goes outside and starts burning down their own house out of frustration. But people who rent do. And that's why you see, when there is rioting in the streets, you see inner cities are often the place that it happens. It's not the suburbs, because the suburbs are like, I'm invested in this. Where if you're renting, you're not as invested. So the chances of having more civil unrest because less people own the properties that they're in increases dramatically as less people can afford houses. I think that's a problem that we need to ensure doesn't come up. And by the way, that doesn't include more police presence. It includes ensuring that everyone actually feels like they're part of the society that they live in. And that comes from things like property ownership. Number 9, exploiting labour market weaknesses. So one of the things, of course, that in a recession they can do is go, right, well, loads of other people are losing their jobs because all those smaller companies are going bust. And therefore they can put the squeeze on all their employees. So no one gets pay rises. Well, there's leadership do, but none of the normal people get pay rises. Lots of other people start losing their jobs. It puts fear into people to the point where they, even if they don't necessarily get a pay cut, they most certainly will not get any pay rises. You can look in the US and the UK, the standard of living for people in both of those countries hasn't actually increased. In percentage terms, hasn't increased for 30 or 40 years, because what the big companies and the billionaire class are doing is they are exploiting labour market weaknesses, and they are ensuring that people can't do better, even though the companies they work for are. And that's partly because labour unions have been destroyed over the last 30 or 40 years. America has done an incredibly good job of demonising unions. And of course, in a knowledge worker environment, people think, erroneously in my opinion, but they think that them and the bosses are all part of the same world. We're all in it together. We all wear a suit and a shirt and a tie, and we all work in an office. So we're all of the leadership level. But of course, that's a lie. right? There are the people who make the decisions and the people who do the work. And the people who do the work in an office are no real different to the folks who were building cars 30 years ago, or 40, 50 years ago. The difference being that in the old days, those folks who were doing the manufacturing, they knew they were different from leadership, and therefore they ensured that they protected themselves with unions. That is no longer true. I don't know. I've never been a member of a union. Would I join one personally? Yeah, actually, to be honest, if I was in an environment where I could, I probably would. In fact, I've been called a barrack room lawyer, so maybe I'd even be a shop steward, but who knows? And I will say I have been incredibly lucky in my career and have done all right. I'm not going to pretend I'm not earning 50,000 a year, right? I'm doing better than that. But I definitely know that I'm not one of the billionaire or multi-millionaire class. They are very different. Number 10, lobbying for policy changes. So here's a thing. Billionaires and large corporations have lobbyists. Your average Joe doesn't. I mean, you could argue, well, they got the unions, but as we discussed in number 9, the unions are toothless these days anyway, and hardly anyone even belongs to a union anymore. So that doesn't really help. So if you want to understand how a lobbyist works, you just need to look at the tax code. So in another video I'll publish in a couple of days, you can look at how much tax you pay as a percentage of your income. And the graph goes up and up and up till you get to about $1 million a year. And then it falls off a cliff. The percentage falls off a cliff. Now, why is that? Because people with what we would call in the UK a PAYE, in the US a salaried job, even the best salaried jobs very, very rarely get to $1 million a year. Once you're above $1 million a year, you're kind of working in a very different way. Yes, you might work for the company, but your salary is hardly ever actually salary. Your compensation plan is almost always based around stock. And then you look at how stock is taxed versus how income is taxed. And you end up with an environment where, and I did this for myself recently, I looked at it versus some people who were earning 10 to 15 times more than me, and they were paying 24% tax, and I was paying 38% tax. Now, a lot of people will say, well, tax is for idiots. No, it isn't. Tax is the cost of civilization. You want schools, you want roads, you want defence, you want fire brigade to turn up, you want libraries, you want education, you want a police force. Those all cost money. And I'm a big believer that those with the broader shoulders pay or have the highest burden. But the billionaire class doesn't do that. And the billionaire class has spent the last 100 years lobbying for policy changes to ensure that they are effectively removed from the tax environment. I find it rather interesting that, and I'm trying not to make this a wildly political presentation, but it's very interesting to me that one of the things that's happening right now in the United States is this idea that there's all this government waste and we should send in these people, billionaires, to go out and root out the problem so we can pay back the national debt, which has got completely out of hand. Well, it's interesting, isn't it? Because there's another way of doing the same thing, and that would be to tax the billionaires. But apparently they're too clever to pay tax. And one has to ask questions like, are you actually part of a society if you don't actually pay tax in it? I would argue, no, you're not. But they still get all the benefits. They'll turn around and go, oh, well, I don't need whatever thing. They drive on the roads. They're still protected by the military, the court system, the law, the police, the fire brigade. They all work for them, even though they don't pay for it. But what's interesting about that is they'll turn around and go, oh, look at all these people sponging off the system, not paying their way. This is a joke, surely, because it's them who isn't paying their way. So for now, I want to leave it with this idea. Throughout society, throughout time, there has really been two types. There have been the people in charge, the incredibly wealthy, and there has been the grinding level of poverty that most people from most of history have lived through. And over the last 120 years in the West, particularly in Britain and the United States, that changed somewhat. That you built a middle class who became property owners, who became part of society, who lifted themselves out of abject poverty and did very well. And you know how they did it? They taxed the super wealthy. The tax rates in the UK immediately after the Second World War were as high as 90%. Now, is that too high? Possibly. But there's a lot of room between paying no tax at all and laughing in everyone's face and paying 90% tax. So, I don't know what the call to arms is here, but I do want you to think of this, because I hadn't until recently. If you look at the economy and go, are these people trying to deliberately crash the economy? The answer, I believe, is yes. And the reason I think they want to is what I've just spent the last amount of time outlining to you here. It's in their interests to remove your money and put it in their pocket. That's how they think. Because if they didn't think like that, they wouldn't be billionaires in the first place. So next, in the next video, I want to talk about something slightly different but connected, which is what are they doing in the US with this Doge and other things where they are trying to disassemble the government. Now, a lot of them, and they will tell you, it's about saving money. I don't think it is. And it isn't about repaying the national debt. And I'll explain why in the next video. All right, everyone. Thanks for your time. I really appreciate it. I do hope you got something out of it. Let's turn this into a discussion. And you know what? You can call me a communist all you like, because I shout at communists and Marxists and all those people all the time as ridiculous. But there is a middle ground. I've always found that the people who have the strongest opinions on any topic are the ones who know the least about it. The more you know about a topic, the more nuanced you realise the actual answers are. So, let's have a conversation about nuance, not about who's a capitalist and who is a communist. All right, everyone, thanks very much for your time. I hope you got something out of this. Goodbye.